I want to tell you about a patient of mine. His name is George. George is 72 years old, retired school teacher, sharp mind, careful about his health, takes his blood pressure medication every morning without fail, walks 30 minutes every day, watches what he eats during the day. By every measure, George was doing things right. And yet, every single morning, when he took his blood pressure, before his medication, the numbers were high, consistently high, sometimes alarmingly so. He came to my office frustrated. Dr. Chen, I do not understand. I take my medication, I exercise, I eat well. Why is my blood pressure so high every morning? I looked at his records, I asked him some questions, and then I asked him one specific question that changed everything. George, what do you eat in the evenings? He paused, and then he told me. After dinner, around 9 or 10 at night, he usually had a snack. Sometimes chips, sometimes crackers and cheese, sometimes leftovers, nothing dramatic, just something small to get through the evening. And that was what his neurologist and I needed to understand. Because what George did not know, and what most seniors do not know, is that what you eat, and when you eat it in the hours before bed, can significantly affect your blood pressure while you sleep and your cardiovascular risk while you are lying there completely unaware. My name is Dr. Daniel Chen. I am a physician in internal medicine, and today I want to explain exactly what we found with George, what the research says about evening eating and cardiovascular health after 70, and what practical changes can make a real, measurable difference to your blood pressure overnight and your long-term stroke risk. Let us begin. Now, first, I want to explain something about blood pressure that most people have never been told, and that changes the way you think about when you eat. Blood pressure is not the same number all day long. It follows a pattern, a daily rhythm called a circadian rhythm. In a healthy adult, blood pressure naturally rises in the morning when you wake up and naturally drops at night while you sleep. This nighttime drop, which doctors call nocturnal dipping, is not just a coincidence. It is important. It gives your heart and blood vessels a rest period, a period of lower pressure and lower demand every single night. Now, research has found that people whose blood pressure drops properly at night have significantly lower risk of heart attack and stroke than people whose blood pressure stays elevated during sleep or does not drop as much as it should. People who do not dip properly at night are called non-dippers. And being a non-dipper is associated with significantly worse cardiovascular outcomes, including higher stroke risk, higher risk of left ventricular hypertrophy, where the heart muscle thickens from overwork, and higher risk of kidney damage over time. Now, here is the critical connection to George's story and to what you eat before bed. A 2024 systematic review published in the Journal of Hypertension found that later time of day for eating was significantly related to higher blood pressure in multivariable models. In plain terms, eating later in the evening, particularly eating large amounts or eating poor quality foods late at night, is associated with higher blood pressure readings in ways that affect the overnight pattern. Now, why does this happen? Let me explain the mechanisms, because understanding them makes the practical advice make complete sense. The first mechanism is sodium and fluid retention. Many common evening snack foods, chips, crackers, processed cheese, deli meats, canned foods, are high in sodium. When you eat high sodium foods, your body retains fluid to dilute the salt. This increases blood volume, and increased blood volume means higher blood pressure. When you eat these foods at night, your body is retaining that extra fluid while you sleep, right when blood pressure is supposed to be dropping. Instead of dropping, it stays elevated or drops less than it should because the sodium is keeping more fluid in circulation. The second mechanism is the insulin response. When you eat, particularly carbohydrates, your blood sugar rises. and your pancreas releases insulin to bring it back down. Insulin does multiple things in the body. One of them that most people do not know about is that insulin activates the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight system, which raises heart rate and raises blood pressure. In younger adults, this effect is modest and the body compensates quickly. But in adults over 65, particularly those with insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes, this effect is more pronounced. And when you eat a high carbohydrate snack late at night, your body is dealing with an insulin response and sympathetic nervous system activation at exactly the time when it should be winding down, and your blood pressure should be falling. The third mechanism is disrupted sleep quality. Eating close to bedtime, particularly heavy or high-fat meals, disrupts sleep quality. It can cause acid reflux. It keeps the digestive system working when the body is trying to shift into its rest and repair state. And poor sleep quality, as research has consistently shown, is independently associated with higher blood pressure and higher cardiovascular risk. A large study tracking more than 300,000 adults found that middle-aged and older night owls had poor overall heart health and a higher risk of heart attack and stroke than those who were active earlier in the day. Now, I want to tell you about a specific study that is particularly relevant to this conversation. A study published in a peer-reviewed journal found that late-night overeating and consumption of poor-quality food late at night was positively associated with subclinical vascular damage, including carotid plaques in patients at increased cardiovascular risk. Let me explain what carotid plaques are, because this is important. Your carotid arteries are the large arteries in your neck that carry blood to your brain. Plaques, which are fatty deposits inside the artery walls, can narrow these arteries over time. And if a plaque ruptures, or if a clot forms at the site of a plaque, it can block blood flow to the brain, causing a stroke. The fact that late-night, poor-quality eating was associated with more carotid plaque formation in people already at cardiovascular risk is a meaningful and specific finding. Not proof of causation, but a meaningful association that deserves to be taken seriously, particularly by adults over 70 who already carry some degree of cardiovascular risk by virtue of their age alone. Now, I want to go back to George, because what happened with George is what I want you to understand. After our conversation, I asked George to do one thing, just one. Stop eating after 7 in the evening. Nothing dramatic, no medication change, no new exercise program, just move his eating window so that he was not eating in the 2 to 3 hours before bed. He came back 6 weeks later, and his morning blood pressure readings had dropped meaningfully. Not to perfect numbers, but measurably lower consistently. He was dipping better at night. His neurologist, who is monitoring him because of his cardiovascular risk profile, noticed the change and asked what had changed. When George told him, the neurologist nodded and said, "That is exactly right. The timing of eating matters as much as what you eat." And most people are never told this. Now, I want to be honest with you. George still needed his blood pressure medication. Changing his evening eating did not replace that. And the change in his numbers, while meaningful, was not the result of a miracle food or a magic intervention. It was the result of removing an obstacle that was working against his blood pressure medication every single night while he slept. This is an important distinction. What you eat before bed does not cause strokes directly. What it can do is interfere with the overnight blood pressure dipping that is supposed to protect your heart and brain every night. And when that protection is consistently reduced over months and years, the cumulative effect on cardiovascular risk is real and meaningful.
Now let me tell you specifically what the research points toward in terms of what to eat and what to avoid in the evening hours after 70. The first category of foods to be most cautious about in the evening
is high sodium processed foods, chips, crackers, pretzels, processed cheese, deli meats, canned soups, packaged snacks of any kind. These are all high in sodium. And sodium in the evening hours works directly against the nighttime blood pressure drop that your cardiovascular system needs. Now, I am not saying never eat these foods. I am saying if you are going to eat them earlier in the day, not in the 2 hours before bed. The second category is high glycemic foods late at night. White bread, white rice, pasta, sweets and desserts, sugary drinks. These cause significant insulin responses, which activate the sympathetic nervous system and work against the body's natural nighttime wind down. The third category is alcohol before bed. I want to address this specifically because many seniors have a glass of wine or a beer in the evening and believe it helps them relax and sleep. The short-term relaxation effect of alcohol is real, but what alcohol does to sleep quality over the course of the night is the opposite of relaxing. Alcohol suppresses REM sleep, the deep restorative sleep stage. It fragments sleep in the second half of the night. It can cause blood pressure to rise in the early morning hours. As the alcohol is metabolized, research shows heavy drinkers have higher blood pressure and greater risk of hypertension, arrhythmia, and stroke. A glass of wine may seem harmless, but drinking before bed can raise nighttime blood pressure and disrupt sleep. Now, the operative word in that research is heavy drinking. One glass occasionally is very different from regular nightly drinking. But if you are struggling with overnight blood pressure control and you drink regularly in the evening, that is a conversation worth having with your doctor. Now, what can you eat in the evening that is less likely to disrupt overnight blood pressure? Let me give you practical options. A small portion of unsalted nuts, walnuts, almonds, or pistachios, without added salt, contain magnesium and healthy fats, and do not carry the sodium load of processed snacks. A small portion of plain yogurt with no added sugar contains protein and calcium and is unlikely to cause a significant blood pressure disrupting response. A small piece of fresh fruit, if your blood sugar is well managed, is a reasonable option. Fresh fruit provides fiber, which slows the glucose response and does not carry the sodium of processed snacks. Herbal tea without caffeine is perhaps the best evening option of all. Chamomile, hibiscus, or valerian root tea have all been studied to some degree for their relaxing and mildly blood pressure supporting effects. And they involve no sodium, no significant insulin response, and no disruption to sleep architecture. Now, I also want to talk about timing because timing is as important as what you eat. Research on what is called time-restricted eating has found that confining your eating to an earlier window, for example, finishing your last meal or snack by 7 in the evening, is associated with better blood pressure regulation, particularly overnight. A clinical trial of adults aged 60 and older with hypertension found that early time-restricted eating is hypothesized to improve blood pressure regulation and endothelial function by enhancing circadian alignment. The circadian alignment concept is important. Your body has internal clocks in virtually every organ and cell that regulate when different functions should occur. Your digestive system, your liver, your pancreas, your blood vessels, all have circadian rhythms that are designed to be most active during daylight hours and to wind down at night. When you eat late, you are asking these systems to be active at a time when their internal clock is saying, wind down, rest, prepare for overnight repair. This circadian misalignment over time
is associated with worse metabolic health, worse blood pressure regulation, and higher cardiovascular risk. Now, I want to give you something very practical that you can implement starting tonight. And I want to frame it the way I framed it for George, not as a dramatic lifestyle overhaul, but as one specific change that removes an obstacle that may be working against your cardiovascular health every single night while you sleep. The change is this: aim to finish eating, including snacks, at least 2 hours before you go to bed. If you go to bed at 10, finish eating by 8. If you go to bed at 9, finish eating by 7. If you genuinely need something, choose unsalted nuts, plain yogurt, fresh fruit, or herbal tea, rather than processed salty or sugary snacks. And reduce or eliminate alcohol in the evening, particularly if your blood pressure is not well controlled overnight. That is a change. That is what George did, and that is what made a measurable difference. To his morning blood pressure readings, over 6 weeks. Now, I want to give you the questions to ask your doctor, so this becomes a real clinical conversation, not just information you watched in a video. Ask your doctor, can we check whether my blood pressure is dipping properly at night? This is done with a device called a 24-hour ambulatory blood pressure monitor. You wear it for a full day and night, and it records blood pressure readings throughout, including during sleep. It tells your doctor whether you are dipping adequately at night or whether you are a non-dipper, with consistently elevated overnight pressure. Also ask, given my current blood pressure control, is there anything about my evening routine, including what and when I eat, that might be worth adjusting? And ask, should I be monitoring my morning blood pressure at home before taking my medication?
Home blood pressure monitoring, first thing in the morning, before medication, is one of the most informative things a senior with hypertension can do. It gives your doctor real data about your overnight blood pressure pattern that a single reading in the office cannot provide. Now, let me close with George, because I want you to know how his story ended. 6 months after that conversation in my office, George came back for a routine follow-up. His morning blood pressure readings were consistently better. Not perfect. He still has hypertension. He still takes his medication. But the numbers that used to alarm him every morning were now in a much more manageable range. He told me, I had no idea that what I was eating at 9 at night was affecting what was happening in my body at 3 in the morning. Nobody ever explained that to me. That is why I am telling you, because nobody explained it to George either until we had that conversation. And you deserve to know this. Not after a stroke, not after a hospitalization. Now, while there is still time to make a simple change that your heart will feel every single night. I am Dr. Daniel Chen. Thank you for spending this time with me today. If George's story resonated with you, please share this video with someone you care about who might be doing the same thing every evening without knowing what it might be doing overnight. Leave your questions in the comments. I read every one, and I will see you in the next video. Take care of yourself.